I'm so scared for the comments of this video, oh god. Hello my dear viewers, I'd like to wish a happy Pride Month to all. And while I'm not exactly a partaker nor an enjoyer of the capitalist corporate rainbow, I thought it'd be a good excuse to finally make and release a video which I've been thinking of for a while now. I'd like to preface this by saying this video will not be an argument, nor will it be political in any sense. I am a gay woman myself and I don't like to think of my existence as political, nor do I want to see fictional LGBT content in that way. This video will essentially just be a look at how One Piece handled queer identities, characters, and themes. As the title says, this is a retrospective. That means we'll be looking at canonical queer characters who exist within the series and how they are presented. We'll be looking at what can be considered coding and what characters it applies to, whether intentionally or not. And this will hopefully be something calm and insightful for all of us, as just making this has been an insightful journey for myself. There will be no shipping and no theories, but of course, some of this does open to interpretation. I just ask you have an open mind upon discussion. If this doesn't sound like your cup of tea, or you just straight up don't care, feel free to give this video a miss. I understand not everyone wants to talk about things like this, especially in regards to a shonen anime. So why am I talking about this? Well, it's just because I think it matters. I think it's extremely odd that One Piece is the biggest anime and manga in the world while also being one of the biggest fictional properties to ever be created. And these kinds of studies don't seem to really exist for it. At least not in video format. One thing about me, I love a good video essay, and I believe it beneficial to have some kind of case study on the queer themes of One Piece. One Piece is an especially interesting one because it's like we've watched it evolve over time, for both the good, the bad, and the ugly. Oda seems to be a writer who wants to grow and wants to learn, and I've found his journey through this property interesting in itself. But we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it all later, because before we start anything, I'm going to hit you with a quick sponsor. While we cannot all be pirates in our current day and age, we can still be pirates online, and we can do that safely with Atlas VPN. If you're not a tech nerd like me and have no idea what a VPN is, a VPN makes it so all your internet searches, browsing, and history is completely protected. It's sure to hide your IP address and it keeps you safe from spying, especially from the pesky FBI agent in your computer who's watching you look up Zoro's big fat boobies as we speak. But Atlas VPN isn't just a VPN, it also protects you from pop-up ads and malicious malware. It can also give you access to any country's version of Netflix or Disney Plus. I mentioned Disney Plus specifically because did you guys know that the entirety of Bleach is on Australian Disney Plus? And with Atlas, you, yes, you, can take advantage of Atlas's huge discount. You can get a 3-year subscription from $1.83 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Even better than that, if you use my link in the description below, you get an 82% discount for premium subscription. Snatch that deal while it's hot, and thank you so much Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video. I won't let you down. Alright, with that introduction out of the way, let's actually get into it. If you're still here, I hope you're excited with me to talk about this colourful queer world of One Piece. And let me tell you something. Upon first watching this series, I was shocked. There's many anime and manga out there that have queer characters. This is true. But I do honestly believe One Piece is pretty in your face with it. Very in your face. Which is why it's strange when people tend to forget about it. I have actually written a few papers in my university days regarding queer media, in terms of what it's been and what it is. And One Piece was never included in any source material. No one talked about it, nor did anyone care about it. And again, this is weird. It's weird there seems to be a radio silence on One Piece existing within the scholarly media world when, at the time of this video, it sold over 516.6 million copies worldwide. For reference, Harry Potter is the biggest fictional literature in the world, and it has sold over 500 million during this time as well. Not only that, but Harry Potter and One Piece were released in the same year. Yes, One Piece is still going, but technically so so is the Harry Potter franchise. So you can imagine how crazy it is to me that One Piece seems to get no pull nor respect in the Western world when it's honest to God been throwing hands with Mr. Potter ever since its release. And it's not like there's been no cultural impact. One Piece has been with a generation of adults throughout its 26 years of existence. Luffy's Straw Hat iconic and legendary along with the devil fruits themselves. Most people know Luffy. Even if they don't know his name, they've seen him. He's no Pikachu, but he's definitely a fictional icon. He may as well be a king in the real world. Either way, my point is, One Piece is never involved in queer media discussions. At least, not from my experience. I assume the reason is because most people outside of One Piece don't actually know queerness exists in the text. And with a series so long, it can be difficult to study unless giving all your time to it, which I definitely totally am not doing now. All this is why I'm so super excited to talk about it, because the queer characters of this series have been itching at my brain ever since meeting them. And more than anything, I'd love to see how these themes have been introduced and handled throughout time. But before I really dig into anything, I'd like to start by saying Oda, the author of One Piece, is a big history buff. I'd say it's quite obvious he's into history, with One Piece not only having an emphasis on the importance of history, but with the inspiration included from real-world history. This includes the warlord pirates, who were based on privateers of the 17th to 18th century, a famous one being Francis Drake. Ironically, the One Piece character Drake was not a warlord, but he is still a pirate working for the government. He also has characters based on real historical pirates, these being Blackbeard, Eustace Kidd, and Jewelry Bonnie, to name a few. Another example is his writing of Wano country, with the island being based on Edo period Japan. In real-world history, Edo Japan was closed off from the 17th to 19th century. In a similar way, Wano country had been closed off worldwide in the series. It's also possible the destruction of Robin's home island, Ohara, was based off the burning of the Alexandria Library. The situation's very different, yet similar in losing one of the largest areas of knowledge and records known to man, in both this fictional property and the real world. One of my favorite examples of history being put into One Piece is with Sanji being forced to wear an iron mask, resembling that of the story of the man in the iron mask in French history. The mask was not only punishment, but existed to hide the prisoner's identity, as I imagine this was also the case for Sanji. So what am I getting at here? Why does Oda being a history nerd matter? It matters because this man clearly does his research when including any new islands or characters. It's more than just making up a fictional story, so I'm sure he knows the ins and outs of the pirate world. After all, you'd have to have some obsession with real-world pirates to make a 23-year-long series about them. And that's what brings me to my point. Pirates, historically, were a mixed bag. They weren't all awful and they weren't all out for riches. We have this Hollywood idea that pirates were known to pillage and plunder, to murder mercilessly and be generally awful. But that's not all they were. Pirates beheaded people at the same rate the monarchy did, and there were no good or bad guys. Everything kind of sucked. So a lot of pirates took to the seas in search of a better life, especially those who were not socially accepted and oppressed during their time. These oppressed groups being women, people of color, and, you guessed it, anyone queer. Back then, if you were queer, it was either you live a life of hiding on land or search out a happier life on the seas. Your existence alone went against the church, so just breathing was a crime. And it only made sense the natural progression would be to search out something better. What I'm saying is, there were queer pirates, many of them, and I find it to be no coincidence that there are very obvious, very loud queers in the One Piece world. It's also extremely interesting that the queer characters don't tend to follow any official authority at all. And to dissect that, we should actually get into the most notable queers to exist within the series. The two earliest ones, and the two most groundbreaking ones in my opinion, are Emporio Ivankov and Bon Clay. Clay. I will talk about their presentation later, but for now, let's consider their positions. Bon Clay was originally a bounty hunter within Baroque Works, known as Mr. 2 Bon Clay and operating under Crocodile. Baroque Works was not government assigned, it was not legally handled, and Bon Clay was the only one who seemed to have their own crew. Put simply, Bon Clay was essentially a pirate, and they worked under a man they'd never met to be given the promise of paradise. We know now this meant taking over a country to create a self-made utopia, but Bon Clay was originally introduced as a villain. Luffy, while being a pirate himself, is our protagonist, so anyone who opposes him can be considered our bad guy of the week. Bon Clay was no exception to this. What is interesting here is, straight away, Bon Clay formed a friendship with the Straw Hats. The fight they had with Sanji, although being a serious fight, was still in good faith, and Sanji even befriended Bon Clay after the whole fiasco was over. From there, Bon Clay sacrificed themselves to allow the Straw Hats to escape. And I immediately picked up that Bon Clay seemed to be the only Baroque Works member who had no real ill intent. They even deliver a brilliant line about being friends for life with Luffy, and Bon Clay stands out to many as a fantastic, endearing character. If we get into Ivankov, also known as Iva, there are similar themes. Iva isn't exactly a pirate, but they are still under no authoritarian establishment, instead being a leader of the Revolutionary Army. The first time we meet Iva, in fact, is in prison, discovering they've made a safe space for the other queer people who have been sentenced to this prison. I find it absolutely no coincidence, in no way, shape or form, that both of these characters are on the rebellious side of the law. Queer people have always been seen as outcasts, people who go against the social norm, and due to this, we found it to be repressive, existing within different constructed societies. As I mentioned previously, this is why queer people turn to piracy, and I feel it's no different within One Piece. One Piece is all about freedom and liberation, and having a queer person be a leader of the Revolutionary Army or be a pirate is extremely on the nose. There's also the fact Luffy himself loves and cares for these queer characters. One of my favorite lines ever actually comes from Bon Clay as they see Luffy again. Impel Down's arc was released from 2009 to 2010, so for an openly queer character to be hugged and loved by our protagonist of the series is honestly something I find amazing. There is complete acceptance here, and it can definitely make queer people feel welcomed and wanted upon reading this series. So why is all of this so revolutionary to me, especially when there have been queer characters in multiple other anime over time and even before One Piece? To me, it's due to the fact queer characters, while being well written, were usually both ambiguous and evil. A lot of the time, queer characters were presented as the villain. Examples I can think of are Dro from Devilman, Griffith from Berserk, and Kaworu from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Dro ended up being the actual devil, and was completely rejected by our main character, Akira. And I could honestly make a video in itself on how Dro and Akira's relationship has been created and presented, but perhaps some other time. Griffith was an ambiguous one. He clearly had a strong love for the main character, Guts, but it's very much argued about amongst the audience. Overall, Griffith was still positioned as an evil character, so ambiguous or not, it's still similar to Dro's situation in Devilman. And finally, there's Kaworu, who had romantic feelings for the protagonist Shinji. Kaworu was presented in a much softer way, but at the end of the day, he still tended to be on the bad side. While these characters are great, and I love every single one of them, they're still on the opposite side of our protagonist. They're either not wanted or not accepted, going down an evil path at some point in time. For a series as big as One Piece to have queer characters who are loved and wanted by our protagonist being on the good side with Luffy, it's truly something fantastic. To me, it seems only natural, as Luffy is a pirate and an outcast himself. himself. So of course he'll love the other outcasts who love him back. This same trait follows the rest of the series, from Kamabakka Island to Wano. Every queer character we meet sides with or loves Luffy in some way. There don't seem to be any canonical evil queer characters as far as I can tell, and once again it feels purposeful. Of course, I could also mention Crocodile here, but I'm afraid he's just a bit too ambiguous to really be labeled as a queer character at this point in time. But now I think we should get into the actual presentation of these aforementioned queer characters. Let's start with the two already mentioned. They are interesting. Bon Clay seems to be known as a gay man in most spaces, but we don't actually really know what their preferences are. Bon Clay's name, in fact, is meant to be gender neutral, representing both a feminine and masculine side. Upon their introduction, they say they are both a man and a woman. Their power in the series equates to this, as they can copy anyone's body and looks. Bon Clay was definitely our first transgender character in One Piece, and it doesn't seem to be debated by any means that this is the case. However, they are definitely stereotypical. Bon Clay wears heavy makeup, ballerina shoes, and has the word Okama on the back of their shirt. For those who don't know, Okama is slang for a homosexual man in Japanese, and this is probably why most interpret them as a gay man. It's certainly a bit of an eyebrow raiser to have homosexual labeled on the back of someone's outfit, and this can be both a positive and negative thing. If we consider Bon Clay a gay man, this is 100% stereotyping of gay men. I think it goes without saying that a lot of gay men do not present themselves like this, and the appearance may be found offensive to some. At the same time, stereotyping is a double-edged sword that can be difficult to find solid ground on. The reason for this is because, due to their stereotypical appearance, it is definite that this character is queer. You cannot argue against the fact that Bon Clay is a queer character and person, since it is quite literally labeled on them. Also, the appearance is honestly the only real offensive thing about Bon Clay. There are no negative stereotypes regarding their behavior, such as being predatory or aggressive, which is an unfortunate common bigoted trope used against queer characters, especially masculine ones. But for the time of Bon Clay's introduction, which was the year 2000, this is a pretty exceptional presentation of a gay and trans person. Put simply, there is absolutely no malice towards Bon Clay, and they are also a well-loved character within the fandom. Now, if we look at Iva, it's extremely similar. Iva is actually based off the Rocky Horror character Frankenfurter, who was also a trans character and an alien. Saying this out loud makes it sound kind of worse than I think it was. I can happily say Iva is not an alien and is just considered a very powerful figure in the One Piece world. Iva's appearance completely resembles that of Frankenfurter, but they are very much their own character. Iva is very obviously a transgender person, and from what I've found, they actually use neo pronouns whenever addressing themselves. Iva doesn't seem to be man nor woman, and their power is a hormone injecting one. I must say, the scenes of them literally transing a person's gender is interesting. On one hand, it was used for someone's joy, as Iva picked out this background character who was not happy as a man. But on the other hand, it was also once used for punishment. I wouldn't exactly call this a negative behavior, but it's definitely a bit aggressive to force someone to change gender when not wanted. On the upside, we have only seen this happen once, and it was at a background character who was upset at their dad being gay. So I am really unsure how to approach this one, and you guys can figure it out. I don't think this was Oda trying to be malicious or anything. I think it was just a gag that was a bit sour. Anyways, Iva is a very, very beloved character. Not only does Luffy love and look up to them, Sanji does as well. As we've seen Sanji mention Iva once or twice, and even be surprised when Iva didn't share information regarding their position in the Revolutionary Army with him. What I'm saying is, Iva is a very important and powerful character character, someone who was there for a turning point of our protagonist, and Luffy owes them his life. Overall, stereotypical presentations aside, Bon Clay and Iva are both extremely well-loved, positively written characters. There's no demonization of their queerness, no disgust or jokes made of their queerness, and they are both returning characters who hold a lot of weight in the story. For the time of its creation, it's genuinely pretty ahead of its time, especially for anime and manga. It feels like Oda actually likes these characters, and while there are some bumps here and there is nothing malicious I can pick up on. But at the same time, there was something else brewing regarding queerness in One Piece. This, of course, is the ever-controversial Kamabakka Island. I am going to be honest. This was extremely weird, especially considering we were seeing Iva and Bon Clay back to back with this island. Kamabakka Island is a place that apparently consists of only gay men, as the term Kamabakka stands for, and please pardon the term as it's very of its time, nothing but transvestites. Simply put, this is an island consisting of gay men who dress in drag. The way it's presented is sometimes not good and can be considered both homophobic and transphobic. I'm sure you're wondering why it's seen as transphobic when it's meant to be only an island of drag queens. And some people see it as just that. But here's the thing, I am not a trans person, nor am I a trans woman, so this is not up to me to decide. For research of this topic, I went to Twitter to ask trans femme One Piece fans what they thought of this, and if they themselves considered it to be transphobic, especially towards trans women. The responses I got differed greatly, and helped me gain a better insight. Even though the Kamabakkas are, in name, meant to be drag queens, there are a few things here or there that push the idea they're more than just cross-dressers. Conversations regarding their womanhood, or even the fact that Sanji in the manga does not actually move to attack nor kick them, meaning he sees them as women? Honestly, I think Oda may have gotten confused and accidentally made a very negative stereotype of trans women. It seems not even he knows what these characters are meant to be queer-wise, and many trans women see this as an extremely mean, extremely nasty take, from their actions to their designs. It's not good, and it can be harmful at times, especially with Sanji thrown in the mix. Even if we don't see these characters as trans women, they are still meant to be gay men, and their behavior comes off as predatory, which is a big no. Then you have Sanji delivering lines such as them not being real women, and it honestly just hurts sometimes. All of Kamabakka was very confusing and very nasty, and the consensus from the beautiful trans ladies I asked was mostly not good. Interestingly enough, it was not all negative, and some trans women did not see them as trans at all, while others felt mixed because the Kamabakkas were very strong and wise as they helped Sanji on his journey. Even with the aggressive behavior and words, Sanji still seems to care for the Kamabakkas, as they are mentioned during the Whole Cake Island arc when Sanji is being threatened and blackmailed. The blackmail being that someone he loves will be assassinated. The Kamabakkas were mentioned as an option for assassination here, so it feels like Oda trying to present that Sanji doesn't actually have ill will towards the Kamabakkas. There also seems to be a rebranding of his move, Hell Memories, as it previously was meant to be him getting angry at the fact he was chased down by the Kamabakkas, calling this scenario Hell. It's a big yikes. But during the Wano arc, it seems this move has somewhat now become equated with his past regarding his blood family and the abuse he experienced. At the end of the day, it's an extremely confusing and weird area. It's especially weird for Oda, as he's written loved queer characters before. From what I can see, and from what I've been told by trans women, there doesn't seem to be malicious intentions here. It was just a really gross joke. But I think Oda has actually been getting better at writing queer characters. characters, especially trans women, and we can see this in Wano. If we jump from the year 2010 to the year 2018, we have ourselves even more canon queer characters in One Piece, the biggest one being Kiku. Kiku is a samurai who was born male, but identifies as a woman. She has a beautiful speech about how she has always been a woman at heart, and is seen as a woman by everyone around her, from her brother to Sanji. She is the first queer character who has absolutely no gags assigned with her queerness. She just exists as a gorgeous trans woman in the series. She's also not buried and is taken completely seriously, and I see absolutely nothing malicious or stereotypical about her. Trans women in the One Piece community especially love her, as they see her as a major step up from the Kamabakkas. And it is a major step up. There's even a scene of Kiku being invited into the ladies' bath with the cisgender women of the series, and it's all done normally. Nothing gross, nothing predatory, nothing harmful. It's a complete positive representation, and I couldn't be happier for her to be included in such a big series. But there is someone I need to mention, a character who has caused a lot of controversy. This character, of course, being Yamato. Now, I am going to tread very lightly here because I know a lot of people are sick of the arguments around this, but I am going to look at this as reasonably as possible. The biggest argument surrounding Yamato is whether they are a trans man or not. Yamato does not look traditionally masculine, but he goes by he/him pronouns and calls himself a man. Yamato presents very differently from characters like Bon Clay and Iva, as he is also not a gag character. However, many think Yamato's association with the character Odin is a gag, as many believe Oda sees Yamato as a woman. I believe this is extremely ambiguous, and Oda is definitely wishy-washy on the subject. Yamato is first introduced as Kaido's son, later reintroduced as Kaido's daughter, then continues to be introduced as Kaido's son, proclaimed by Yamato after that. The reason this continues to be argued is because of Yamato claiming he is Odin, a character who is a man, explaining that if Odin was a man, then he is a man as well. Due to this, many see Yamato being a man as a joke, believing he is not a man, he just wants to be Odin. But upon reading the text, I quite honestly don't believe this to be a joke. Yamato's backstory was very heavy and the tone was very serious, as he had to escape from his father to be something Kaido didn't want him to be. Kaido would murder anyone who helped Yamato, while Odin's own followers essentially gave Yamato their blessing and wanting to be Odin. Not only this, but we discover the only reason Kaido is treating Yamato this way is because they are punishing him, only going along with calling Yamato his son to mock him in pursuit to be Odin. However, as they fight on the roof, Yamato has a very powerful speech where he says he had people that accepted him. Yamato essentially doubles down in the face of his father's mocking, instead completely following in the footsteps of Odin and never backing down that he is a man. I do not consider this a joke at all, nor do I ever consider it done for laughs. Yamato is completely serious about his identity, to the point he will fight his father for it, and it's honestly a parallel to the experience a lot of trans men have with their own parents. Not to these extremes, of course, but having to fight to be accepted for who you are is an extremely queer-coded allegory. The other argument I've seen against Yamato being trans is the fact on his Vivre card it says Yamato is a female. However, Vivre cards sometimes showing misinformation aside, I think the most important thing to note here is that this is stating Yamato's sex. From asking around, I've found the Japanese language does not actually distinguish sex and gender, and those are two different things. For example, if we look at Kiku's Vivre card, it says her sex is male, but obviously going through the manga, we know Kiku is a woman. I don't think the Vivre card is the best example to use if we want to distinguish how Yamato sees himself. especially with the manga as our main media source. But there are also other things, such as Yamato being included in an all-women's color spread, or Yamato being drawn as an oidan, which is a female position. I ended up going to Twitter again to ask trans men within the fandom of their opinion on Yamato, and it mostly came down to one thing. They were all extremely happy he existed, but many were conflicted with the indecision of Oda's presentation of him. After all, admiring a man so much that you realize you are a man yourself is a very common experience to have as a trans man. Not a single trans man seemed to take Yamato's love for Odin as something nonsensical, and instead related to it. In fact, every reply I got saw Yamato as trans or trans-coded, even if it was accidental or not. I think the thing we need to remember here is, ultimately, Oda is a cis-het man. He has no knowledge from what we know of the queer experience. It is very possible the connections made with the trans experience and Yamato are completely accidental, but I still wouldn't agree that he sees Yamato as a woman. After all, in the text, Yamato is constantly referred to as a man, not just by himself, but by those around him. Luffy completely accepts it, most don't question it, and there's one or two scenes where Oda seems to double down on it. In the same way Kiku was invited to the women's baths, Yamato was invited to the men's baths, Yamato stating there are no mixed baths within the castle, so he can't join the women. It's true Sanji making hard eyes and exploding can be seen as a joke here, and by all means it is a joke. But I don't think Sanji making hard eyes at Yamato means much to Yamato's own gender. After all, Sanji made hard eyes at Bon Clay whenever they turned into Nami, fully knowing it was Bon Clay. Everyone else in the bath pays no mind to Yamato, and Sanji himself is the joke here. Yamato is also presented as masculine in One Piece Gakuen, a side manga looked over and approved by Oda. The name Yamato itself is a masculine name, and Yamato constantly calls himself Yamato, Kaido's son. No, this is not a mistranslation. He says this multiple times, and it is translated this way multiple times. I think what's happening here is Oda isn't sure how to properly approach this, as trans men in Japan aren't actually as well known or as accepted as trans women seem to be. Interestingly enough, a man who has transitioned into a woman in Japan is much more common knowledge, and from my research, this roots back to Kabuki theater and how many men played women so intensely to the point they essentially transitioned into women during their daily lives. The same cannot be said the other way around, as biological women were not allowed on the Kabuki stage in historical times. I also find it so interesting that Kiku and Yamato both wear theatrical masks. Kiku's much more feminine, while Yamato's is much more masculine. What I'm saying is, I don't think Oda really knows how to write nor present Yamato, and this is why he seems to be so wishy-washy about him. For this reason, it's why I personally believe Yamato's queerness can indeed be up to interpretation. Many trans men love his addition. They love he can represent them and their experiences, but there is an acceptance that there's an ambiguity to him. However, I am personally unsure why Yamato is referenced as she/her in outside spaces, as even though Yamato's gender can definitely be up to debate, his pronouns are very definitely he/him. Considering in canon story, everyone calls Yamato he/him, including Luffy, who calls Yamato Yama-o, which is basically Yama-bro. Yamato was only addressed as she/her when he was a child, but since then, he has always used the pronouns he/him. Even if Yamato's gender is ambiguous, there's still something to be said about Yamato's self-addressed pronouns. After all, Oda himself hasn't actually called Yamato she/her either, as many translations have actually taken liberties in Oda's speech. Or at least, from what I found, Oda hasn't really addressed Yamato with any pronouns at all. What I'm saying is, Yamato's pronouns are pretty cemented in being he/him, and I think even if it is accidental, this is still a good representation representation for trans men. Sometimes we can only take what we can get, and wishy-washy or not, Yamato holds a special place in the hearts of a lot of trans men within the One Piece fandom. I think that's a beautiful thing, and who am I to take that away from someone? I believe it healthy to debate these points since, once again, Oda is a cis-het man, but he's still made a character the trans community can connect with, and I don't see why he would be against that. Throughout the series, there's a few more light points with other characters, such as Nami seeming to have this affiliation with women, even calling another woman sexy and wishing to have her as her secretary, or the character Boa's mere existence. From what we know of Boa, she's meant to be so beautiful that everyone falls in love with her, and this includes women. It's pretty hard to argue that these women are, well, straight considering how Boa works, but it's more of a background thing. However, if we look at coding within the series, the biggest one we have is the protagonist himself, Luffy. Although Oda hasn't outright labeled Luffy with this term, Luffy is definitely coded as asexual. There are a few points where Luffy has looked at a naked woman and had a reaction, but Oda ultimately stated that this was Luffy copying the atmosphere due to the reactions of other men. We've seen Luffy be hit by Boa's love beam, which is meant to turn anyone attracted to her to stone, and it didn't work. In fact, Luffy had no sexual reaction or attraction at all to Boa. Oda has stated this is because it wouldn't feel like Luffy otherwise. And it seems he doesn't really know what he's done, but it's a very heavy asexual coding. Once again, he's not outright labeled this way, but arguments can be made nonetheless. To conclude this video, because it's getting so long, the queer representation in One Piece is extremely up and down. On one hand, we have really nasty portrayals of queerness. On the other hand, we have extremely loved and popular characters who are well written and well received. And sometimes we just have straight up ambiguous presentations. I didn't touch on everything here, as I'm sure a lot of you would have noticed, but I'd probably need to make a second video for that. All in all, One Piece is honestly pretty good with its queer representation, and Oda doesn't seem to have any real malice nor hate for the queer community. If anything, I think it's the exact opposite, and he seems to embody the ideals of his own protagonist, which is letting people live as they want to live. It's true there have been some really ugly scenes here and there, but I would pin that up to really bad jokes he didn't recognize as offensive. Or at least, I'd hope so. But from what we can see, he's definitely gotten much better throughout the years, and I do think this is a discussion worth having. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate that, and I do ask to please be respectful of others' interpretations. Once again, I do not mean for this video to be an argument, but more so a dissection of what we've seen regarding queerness throughout One Piece. And with that, thanks for watching. I was honestly very nervous to make this video, but I feel I presented everything best I could, and I hope this was enlightening in some way. The topic of queerness in media has always been an interesting one to me, especially regarding One Piece, and it means a lot to me that you guys actually enjoy listening to my video essays. Just a quick reminder that I do have a Patreon, and if you would like to support me there, I'd really appreciate it. However, I know not everyone can support me in that way, and just watching and sharing these videos does more than you can imagine for me. If there's anything you'd like to see me cover, One Piece or otherwise, please let me know. Once again, happy Pride Month, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. See ya!